Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video we are going to build this project idea generator. Now what this app does, it uses the ChatGPT API to generate project ideas based on this interface. This interface will be built with Tkinter and Python. The way it will work is you have to select a programming language, so for example let's say Java. Then you have to select the project difficulty, so you can opt for a hard or a medium project. Then you can choose to include certain features. So you can say that I want my project to have a database or I want my project to have an API. Then you press on generate ideas. So as you can see in the text box right here, 10 different ideas were generated. The first one is an online banking system. With the description, it also suggests to use MySQL as a database to store information and transactions. Here you can also have a restaurant management system, and so on. So these are different project ideas generated using AI, using ChatGPT through this interface. So this is useful in two ways. First, you build a Python project, you have an interface, and you have the ChatGPT API, which makes it a somewhat complex Python project. Second, when you want to build future projects, you will never run out of ideas because now you have this interface to help you get ideas for your coding projects. Alright, so without further ado, let's get started and see how we're going to build this step by step. The first thing I want you to do is navigate to platform.openai.com. This is where you can create an account for the OpenAI APIs. There are different APIs that you can use. We're going to choose to use the ChatGPT API. After creating an account, I want you to navigate to platform.openai.com/account/API keys. This is where you're going to be able to get an API key. So all you need to do is to generate a new key. You're going to have a button here that tells you to generate it. After you generate it, just copy it, and now we'll see where we're going to put it. To keep our application secure, we're not going to hard code the API key right into our Python code. Instead, we're going to store it as an environment variable. Now, if you're using Windows, you need to navigate to System Properties, Advanced, and then go to Environment Variables and add this as your environment variable. The variable should be named like I'm displaying on the screen right now, so OpenAI API Key. Alright, after you've added your variable, you can just close this, and now we're going to head over to VS Code to see how we can interact with the ChatGPT API using Python. Alright, so we're in VS Code. Let's use this chat.py script to write a program where we interact with the ChatGPT API using Python. First things first, you need to import OS. We'll use this to get the environment variable where we stored our API key. Second, we're going to import OpenAI. This is the library that will enable you to talk to OpenAI using Python. To install it, you simply have to run pip install OpenAI. The next thing you need to do is you have to get the key from the environment variable. To get the key, you just run os.getEnv. This will retrieve the environment variable with this name right here. Next, we're going to send a request to this API key. So we're going to save the response in a variable named response. We run openai.chatCompletion.create. This is what will enable us to send a request to ChatGPT. We have to specify two different parameters. The first one is the model. So model in this case is the AI model that we're using. GPT 3.5 Turbo is the exact model for ChatGPT, the one that was released very recently. Of course, recently we also had GPT-4, but not everyone has access to it, so for now we're going to stick with GPT 3.5. The second thing you specify is the messages. Now this is going to be a list object, and this is going to be a list of dictionaries. Now the dictionaries look like this. They have two things: role and content. So the role is the role that you're assuming in this request. This can be one of three things: user, system, or assistant. We're going to stick with user. So the user role is exactly how ChatGPT would behave if you were using the regular old ChatGPT from the UI on the web. And content is going to be the question or the prompt or the message that you're going to send to ChatGPT. In this case, I specify this to be hi ChatGPT, say hi back. You can ask any question here for trial, but this is basically how you'll interact with ChatGPT. Of course, this will return the response object, which we store in this response variable. To get the actual answer that ChatGPT provides, we say response.choices sub-0. Choices sub-0 means that if we had multiple responses, we want to get the first one. Now here we only sent one prompt or one message, so we're only going to have one answer anyways. So this is why we say choices sub-0. This is the very first answer that we get. then .message.content to get the content of the response. Of course, finally, we have to print it. So now let's run this. As you can see, this returns hello there, hi back to you. So this response was returned by ChatGPT. We did not explicitly type this. This was in fact returned by ChatGPT. Alright, so these few lines of code that you see right here, this is what will enable us to actually interact with ChatGPT via Python. Next, we're going to build the interface which will help us generate the project ideas. So now we want to build this UI. We're going to head back into VS Code and we have a new Python file. This one is called main.py. And I'm going to import OS and OpenAI because we're going to use them for the ChatGPT API like we just did. And I'm also going to import Customtkinter as CTK. So Customtkinter is a library that enables you to have more modern looking Tkinter interfaces. So Tkinter is a very popular Python GUI library. However, a common complaint is it does look outdated at times. So we're going to use Customtkinter because it makes the UIs look much more modern. To install Customtkinter, you simply have to run pip install Customtkinter like you see right here. Alright, so to get started, first thing we have to create a root widget in Tkinter. So root will be equal to ctk.ctk. So this represents your window. This will be the window where our application will run. It's the largest widget in our application. All the other widgets are nested inside of it. This is how Tkinter works. It's a hierarchy of widgets. Next, we're going to specify the geometry of this root window. This is going to be the size of the window. So I chose 750 by 550. This was just based on a bit of trial and error. You can change this to however you like. Next, I'm going to set the title of my window. So this is going to be ChatGPT Project Idea Generator. Now, if you look back in our reference image, you can see the title of the window right here, ChatGPT Project Idea Generator. This is where it will be. So we set this using the root.title function. Finally, I run root.main loop. This is the event loop of our application. It's like an infinite loop that keeps on executing so long as your GUI is present on your screen. So let's run it and see what we have. As you can see, we have an empty window. This is the size that we chose and this is the title of the window. The next thing, we have to set the theme. You may have noticed that mine by default was in dark mode. This is because my system is in dark mode, so Customtkinter assumes by default the same mode as your system. If your computer is in light mode, it's going to have a light UI as well. To set it to dark mode manually, you simply have to run ctk.setAppearanceMode dark. Alright, after doing that, we're going to start by adding the label. So this is going to be this title that you see right here. It's a plain label in Tkinter. To add it with Customtkinter, we just say ctk.ctk_label. We create this object and save it in a variable called title label. And what we do is simply specify the parent. So in this case, the parent of this widget will be the root window. When I say parent, this means that this label exists inside of the root window. As I said before, it's a hierarchy. They're nested within each other. So I have to specify the parent. In this case, this is root. And then I say the text of my label. Now, if I run this, nothing will happen. This is because I haven't added my widget to my screen. So if you're not familiar with Tkinter, in Tkinter, anytime you need to add a widget, you have to do two steps. You need to first create the object, and second, you need to pack, place, or grid to add it to the screen. So we're going to use pack because it's the simplest by default. So here we say title_label.pack. This should make it appear in our screen. Now running the application again, as you can see, we have this label right here. So this says Project Idea Generator. Now to edit this a little bit, we're going to add some padding. Padding is what spaces it out from the rest of the screen. So here you can see I say pad x equal 10. That means horizontally along the x-axis, I'm going to pad by 10. And then the pad y, which is the padding on the y-axis, I'm going to pad by 40 at the top and 20 at the bottom. So here you can see this space right here. This is the padding on y, and this is equal to 40. Now the other thing I'm going to do is to make the font size bigger. So to do that, here in the label, I specify the font property. This will be equal to ctk.ctk font. The size is equal to 30, and then the weight will be bold, just to make it look slightly better. Now running it again, as you can see, the project idea generator now looks like this. Alright, the next thing we're going to create is going to be this frame. So you see this lighter gray looking frame right here, so this square, it's going to be a frame that houses other objects in our application. To create the frame, simply we say frame is equal to ctk.ctk_frame. The parent is root as well, and we also have to pack it. Now in pack, we specify two properties here as well. We fill it along the x-axis, we make it as wide as possible, but we also have some padding along the y-axis equal to 100. This is what will enable us to space this out like this. So this is equal to 100 here, and this part is equal to 100 here. All right. Let's go back and run it and see what we have. As you can see, this is our frame and our label. So we have created the first two widgets in our Tkinter application. The next thing I'm going to do is to create this inner frame right here. So this is yet another frame nested inside the larger frame, which will contain two things. It will contain the label that says programming language, as well as the drop-down that contains the list of programming languages. To create it, first we create the frame. I will call this language frame, the same thing that we did before, it's CTK frame. Next, I'm going to pack it. I add some padding. This will have a padding of 100 on the x-axis, so this is the value here, so this will be 100 here. And it will have a padding of y 20 at the top and 5 at the bottom, and I will fill both the y and the x-axis. So I've created the frame. Next thing, I create the label. Again, this will be a CTK label. So here, the parent in this case is not going to be root. In this case, it's going to be the language frame. And the parent of language frame was frame itself. So like I said before, this is a hierarchy. They are nested inside each other. Looking back here, you can see that this label is inside this frame. This frame is inside the larger frame, and the larger frame is inside root. It's a hierarchy. It's like we have multiple boxes nested within each other. After creating the label, I set the text to programming language. I give it a font which is bold. Finally, I just have to pack the label. Now, after creating the label, we also want to create the dropdown. So to create the dropdown, we use something called a combo box. So this will be ctk.ctk combo box. The parent is language frame as well. So it's inside this frame. Now, values is the property we need to set for the combo box to give it the list of values that we want. In this case, I set this to be 5 different programming languages, Python, Java, and so on. You can set this to whatever languages you like. I just chose these randomly. And then you just have to pack the dropdown. So you just pack, and I gave it some padding of y at 10. The padding I'm adding is just to make it look better and not to have everything squished together. All right, let's run it and see what we have now. As you can see, we have our first inner frame. This is the programming language, and here we have a drop-down that enables us to select any one of these programming languages. Next, we're going to create the second frame right here for the project difficulty. We're going to follow the same steps. We start by creating a frame. This is going to be difficulty frame. Notice that the parent in this case is frame. So this is the parent. This one is the parent of this frame right here. We of course have to pack it. I give it some padding and I fill both the X and Y axis. I create a label using CTK label. This one will have a text of project difficulty and it will be bold as well. So here I'm following the exact same steps that I've done before. Next, I'm going to pack this label. So now what we want to create is these buttons right here. These are called radio buttons, and it enables us to only select one of these as a value. So to do that, we're going to need something called a string var. So difficulty value is going to be ctk.stringvar. String var is an object that we're going to bind to these radio buttons, and it will contain the current value that is selected by these radio buttons. To add the first radio button, we simply create radio button 1. This will be equal to ctk.ctk radio button. The difficulty frame is the parent. The text should say easy, and the variable, so this radio button is associated with this variable. In this case, that's difficulty underscore value, and the value of this radio button is easy. Of course, I also have to add it to my screen, so I have to run radiobutton.pack. In this case, you may notice I say something side equal left. In order to have multiple buttons, multiple radio buttons on the same line, I have to use this side property to align them all on the same horizontal line. And then the others will be on the same side. So the padding along the x-axis will be equal to 20 from one side and 10 from the other side. The padding on the y-axis is equal to 10. So now let's run it and let me show you how it looks like. As you can see, this is the second frame, project difficulty, and we have only one radio button. So let's add 2 more radio buttons very quickly. So radio button 2 will also be equal to a CTK radio button. This one, the text will say medium and the value will say medium. So when this one is selected, the value of difficulty value, which is a variable that we bind to these radio buttons, this one will contain medium. And of course, we pack it as well. We do the same for radio button 3. This one has a text of hard and a value of hard. So let's run it. As you can see, this is how it looks like. Next, we want to create the last frame that you see here. This one contains the features and it contains 2 different checkboxes. To create it, the same method, we create a frame. This will be CTK frame and we pack it. We also create a label. This label will say features. It will be bold as well. So this is the same thing that we've done multiple times by now. Alright, to create the checkboxes, we'll say checkbox 1 is equal to ctk.ctk checkbox. The features underscore frame is the parent and the text should say database. So the text is what will be displayed with this checkbox. Now, of course, we have to pack it to add it to the screen. So we pack it by doing this and we of course say the side is equal to left. Then we do the same for a second checkbox. This one will have the text API and it will also be packed onto the screen. Now let's run it and see what we have. This is our interface by now. This is what it looks like. So we have all 3 inner frames that we wanted with all the information to select different properties of our project idea. Finally, the last 2 things we want to add is this button right here, which will enable us to generate the ideas, and this text box right here, which will house all the responses from ChatGPT. To create them, the same thing, very easy. We first create the button by creating a CTK button object. We put this inside frame, and then the text should say generate ideas. Of course, we have to pack it, specify some padding here and there. And then we do the same for the text box. So we create this using the CTK text box and we specify the font to be 15 just so it's a bit more readable, and we pack it as well. So now running it, let's see the final interface that we have, and this is how it looks like. As you can see, we have the frame, we have 3 different smaller frames with some inputs, we have a button. Now if I click it, nothing happens because we haven't written code for that yet. And we have the text box. So this is where ChatGPT will write its answer. Okay, so we want to program this button to actually generate these ideas and talk to ChatGPT. The first thing, we go back to the line where we created the button and we add a property called command. So command will be associated with another function inside Python. So I'm going to call this generate. Now this generate function will be executed when the button is clicked. So what command does is basically when the button is clicked, go ahead and run the generate function. So what's the generate function? Let's actually create it ourselves. So I'm just going to come here and create a function called generate. So you say def generate and we have a new Python function. Inside this function is where we're going to interact with ChatGPT. So what we want is when we press on generate and we execute the generate function, we want to retrieve the values of this dropdown. We want to know what the programming language is. We want to know the difficulty and we want to know which features are checked, if any are checked. Then we'll use this information to build the prompt. So the prompt will be the message we sent ChatGPT. It will be based on this information. So back to VS Code. First things first, let's create our basic prompt. The prompt will look like this. It says, please generate 10 ideas for coding projects. Now you can actually send this to ChatGPT and it will give you some ideas. But here we haven't specified any information related to the programming language, the difficulty, and all the things we have in our interface. So here I'm also just printing the prompt. All right, let's get which programming language we want. To get the value of the programming language, I simply run language underscore dropdown, which is the object, this object right here, .get. So .get will get me the value of this dropdown. This could be Python, Java, whatever we have currently selected. Next, I will add this to my prompt. So simply I say prompt plus equal, so I concatenate to my prompt the following string. The programming language is plus language plus dot. So here it's like I'm telling ChatGPT, please generate 10 ideas for coding projects. So the programming language is Python. The next thing is we're going to add the difficulty. Now we can also get the difficulty as follows. We say difficulty underscore value dot get, and then we add this to the prompt as well. So the difficulty is plus difficulty. All right, let's actually try it and print out the prompt. So for now, we don't have anything related to ChatGPT. We're just trying the program to see how the prompt looks like. So let's select, for example, Java. and I want a project difficulty of medium. So let's press on generate ideas. Now here you can see this was printed. Please generate 10 ideas for coding projects. The programming language is Java. The difficulty is medium. So we have built the prompt using the inputs from our UI. Perfect. The next thing we want to do is to actually add the values of these two checkboxes. Now these may be checked or unchecked. So what I want to do is I say if checkbox1.get. Now checkboxes in Tkinter, they return Boolean values. So these will be equal to true or false. So it will be true if it is checked. So this is why I say if checkbox1.get. What I'm going to do is add to my prompt, the project should include a database, because if the user checks this one, this means that, hey, I want a database with my project. All right. Now we do the same for checkbox2. So if checkbox2.get, add to the prompt, the project should include an API. Okay. Let's run it and try it out. Let's see, I want the language to be JavaScript, I want it to be hard, and I want to include an API and include a database as well. So the prompt will look like this. Please generate 10 ideas. Programming language is JavaScript. The difficulty is hard. The project should include a database. The project should include an API. So now we are able to fully generate the prompt. The next thing we're going to do is to actually send a request to ChatGPT using this prompt. This is very easy. We already saw how we can do it earlier in the video. So I'm going to go back to chat.py and copy this part right here. So I'm going to copy it into my function. So let's go here. Let me just fix these. All right. So I've copied this. I've gotten the value of the API key. And here I'm sending a request to ChatGPT. And finally, I'm printing out the answer. All right, so what I want to do is rather than here say, hi ChatGPT, say hi back, here I'm going to pass the prompt that we built. So this message, the message where we're asking for programming project ideas with this language, this difficulty, so on, we're going to send it to ChatGPT to get a response. And finally, what we're going to do is to simply add this into our text box. The result dot insert, and then we say 0.0. This means insert it at the very start of the text box, and I'm going to insert answer. Okay, now we can finally test our project. So let's run it. And let's say I want my project ideas in Java, difficulty hard, and I want the database feature. So let's generate ideas. You have to wait maybe a minute for ChatGPT to respond. This will depend on your internet speed as well. But as you can see here, we have our answer. So these are the 10 different projects that ChatGPT generated. So it gave us these ideas. They are of a somewhat hard difficulty, and they include a database in all of the ideas because that's what we asked for. You can play around with this, test it out as much as you like, find out how many projects you can build with all of these languages based on these features. This brings us to the end of the video. Do let me know if you enjoyed it. Let me know what kind of project ideas you generated with this. Please consider subscribing and leaving a like if you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.